call this meeting to order and declare a quorum of 6 members present. We're going to start with workshops C1, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2017-18 budget. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yokin, members of the board. It's our pleasure to be with you and talk about the budget a number of times this evening. We will go over a little, Mr. Martindale will go over a little bit of where we ended up with our recommendation for the budget with you here at workshop. We will have a public hearing at 6:45 for the purpose of talking about the budget and the proposed tax rate, and then we will ask for you to approve both at the regularly scheduled meeting at 7 o'clock this evening. This marks the work that began in March, earlier for folks in our departments and on campuses, developing their budget plans, looking at potential exceptional items and staffing requests. And then we worked as an administration over the last several months to get some of those key variables in place, knowing making our projections on the number of students for next year, making projections on knowing what our tax rate, what our taxable values would be, and finally trying to discern what was going to happen to us in the Texas legislature. So with all of those variables in play, Mr. Martindale, Mrs. Parks, and the business office staff have compiled a budget to which Mr. Martindale will give us the highlights here, and love to have any of your questions after this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. And just before I get going, a tremendous amount of work by a number of people, too many departments to mention and individuals, obviously campus and department administrators, the business office, human resources, just a collective effort by many. As we started the process, as Dr. Ely mentioned, in March with our budget parameters, and then started working forward beginning at the April meeting. So again, just want to make sure and articulate my appreciation to all the folks that helped bring us through this process to this evening. With that being said, the proposed final that will be up for consideration or approval at the regular board meeting at 7 o'clock, we had an ending revenue projection of just shy of $112 million at $111.8 million. Our property value revenue over last year's adopted budget is up 11.4%. That's equivalent to just a hair over $10 million. And I will speak to that value here in just a few minutes as I progress through our presentation. We are using a 2.9% growth on our enrollment. That's the projection from our demographers, which would have us landing at approximately 13,580 students. We have additional revenue pieces, none of which are near the driver of our local value, but to note, nonetheless, these are increases over 16-17 adopted values and co-curricular, 32.5 thousand increase. Those are, for example, gate receipts, those types of items. Interest earned, we're increasing that over last year's adopted value by 200,000. We've amended that a little bit along the way as we progress this year, but in relation to last year's values, increase that projection by 200 due to additional funds from local property revenue, as well as Dr. Wesson would be happy to know that interest rates are just really working their way up these days. They are. I think tax pool was at 1.01 today, so I can't wait for the next quarterly investment report. All right. Other revenue, 57.5, that's E-rate reimbursements, facility rentals, those types of things. But again, obviously, the main driver in our revenue is our local property values.
Can I ask a question on the enrollment, and it might be something that you address later? When do y'all really start monitoring that? I know that classes haven't started, but is there a good indication of where we're going to be?
I look at it every morning at 7:45, beginning the first day of August. Mr. Schaefer, we are currently, when I left my office a few minutes ago, at 13 around 350. we're adding on average 35 students a day for the last week and a half. So we are tracking accordingly at this point in time.
If it gets below 35, please let us know.
Yes, sir, I will.
Yeah, right.
On the appropriations side of our budget, we're projecting a little over 114 million. The main component of our appropriations are people, increasing for this year for 17-18. We came in at really about 2.13 million added to payroll. That was for our salary increases, equity adjustments, which allowed us to be a little more aggressive with some of our salary schedules that are more reflective of our market, as well as increase our the district contribution to employees' premiums at $10 per participating employee per month. On new personnel, that was right at 2.36 million. That is just shy of 1 million of new positions, and then Pecan Trail came in just right at 4 as well. 1.4. Of course, a new appropriation to us this year due to our increasing property values and our slower growth this past year is recapture payment. We're tracking just shy of 6 million, and that will be reflected in the budget that's under consideration at 7 o'clock. Of course, that number will fluctuate depending on where that 2.9% growth falls. If we come out better with our enrollment, it will reduce our wealth per student and help with our recapture payment. If we come up short, it will surely go over 6 million. I said I was going to touch over on the 11.4%. I'm going to go back to our revenue slide. That 11.4% is a little over 10 million of additional revenue from last year from local property values. As you can see, 10 million, the state is going to help themselves to 6 million of that. So we're down to 4 fairly quickly. If you look at the main funding components from the state, the foundation and available school fund components, we're actually receive about 1.2 million less projected for next year than we did current year. So you're looking at about 7.2 million difference when you consider the state's funding to us as well as the recapture. So you take the 10 million and 7.2 eats at it fairly quickly. So really net effect, we're looking at 2.83 million before we even began moving forward with some things. So again, lots of discussion about school finance, and I've said this several times that we are the poster child for the local taxpayer increasing burden and the state lessening their contribution to funding public ed. With the projected appropriations and revenue, we have projected a deficit of 2.4 million. We started with a 5.4 way back in March, so we have slowly worked our way down to 2.4. With that, we currently have for 16-17 a little over 32 million in our fund balance. We would project that our ending fund balance, if we pull the 2.4 to manage our projected deficit, would leave us at 29.6 million, which is right at 26% of our operational budget that we're proposing on the appropriations side. This is just the numbers on the same page or on the same slide that I had on the first and second slides. Again, just shy of 112 million on revenue, a little over 114 for appropriations. And I apologize for my soapbox, but again, if you take 6 million out of that 114, we have a significantly different picture than what we're managing with a projected deficit of 2.4. The proposed tax rate that would support the budget we'll be proposing for consideration later this evening, our M&O remains at $1.04. Our I&S rate was last year for 16-17, 35.6 cents. We'll be proposing a 35.8 cents. That's an increase of 0.2 cents. And this is to pay for the second half of our 2015 bond. If you recall, that was $135.9 million. We sold those in 2 different sales. So this additional 0.2 cents will cover the second half of those sales, or $67.9 million that we had earlier this past February. Originally, in our original projections, we were anticipating around 2.8 cents. So obviously our increased values did benefit us from the INS side for sure. This is a historical of our tax rates. Again, you can see $1.04 on the INS, 32.29 and 15/16. This 3.31 cents for the first part of the 2015 bond sale that we had in February 2016. And then the 0.2 is what we're proposing to pick up the second half of that. So collectively, the 2015 bond package had an impact of 3.51 cents on the overall INS rate. Our golden line is reflective of our 17.5% of our adopted or projected appropriations. The red is reflective of when we adopted our budget last year. The green, who can forget the green? I have attempted to. The color green is not correct for that particular line, but this is reflective of when we began in April with the $5.4 million projection. The blue is reflective of the budget we're proposing this evening projected out. And again, as I've mentioned several times before, you can see the opening of new campuses, and then things level out for us a little bit. As I mentioned to Dr. Ely this morning, 17.5% of our appropriations. Remember that there's a $6 million price tag sitting in there. And of course, unless we have significant student enrollment or slowdown or property values, then our recapture payment will compound itself out in the future. So that influences your 17.5% appropriations number as well. We are be happy to answer any questions or go back to a particular slide.
First of all, I want to thank you for changing from the green to the blue, because obviously you've done a great job of identifying what we actually can afford to do and still maintain the quality of education we expect within our community. And to all those people and to yourself, Mr. Martindale, thank you very much for that. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Yes. You want to go? You want me to? I'll go. Did I see the okay. The on the INS increase, so for what is that, 3 cents in essence, we built an intermediate school, a middle school, and an elementary school?
3.51. Yes, sir.
Nice.
My question is, I have two. The projected deficit for a new school is what typically that we counted on?
We actually budgeted $1.5 million for Pecan Trail this year and came in at 1.4. Elementary schools right now, I'm utilizing $1 million for the middle, $2 million.
Yep.
Correct. That's purely a payroll cost. There are operational numbers that go into that as well, as far as utilities and insurance costs. But that's what I set aside for payroll cost.
Right. I just want to point out that we're, that given what we're under as far as the recapture payment, that it was planned. I mean, we're right within those numbers of being planned. If we hadn't opened a school, we'd be, I mean, that's what everybody needs to understand is you don't open a school, which we clearly need, or we have to dip into our fund balance in order to make this work with giving the state $6 million. I just wanted to point out that Consultation's doing a great job of managing their money. And the other thing I want to ask is what's the recapture drop dead date as far as numbers in October?
Yeah, we have through January to submit some of our enrollment numbers, but that will move throughout the course of the entire school year, and TEA reconciles after the close of the school year. So that number can move on you, Carol, throughout the course of the entire school year, depending on your enrollment.
Okay, so you don't pay the $6 million till the end of the next school?
We'll pay it in the spring.
Just briefly about how Settle Up works. Just real briefly.
We'll pay based on their projection and our enrollment numbers in the spring. If we finish the year with better enrollment, they will reconcile and back to us. If it's worse enrollment, then we will owe additional funds.
Bite your tongue. We just need to go find some students.
Absolutely.
Can you
Bring your neighbor to school day.
Not so much we have to build another school.
Right.
I have mentioned to many, if you see a kid, stop and make sure and take them to the school. Absolutely. And again, I said this earlier, I'm appreciative of there are many that contribute to this, and no, I mean, $2.4 million deficit is something to be proud of. No, but considering our circumstances and our recapture, and we're opening a new school building, and I compliment the board for this part and us being able to, and y'all being supportive of us being able to do something for our current employees as far as raises and a little bit on insurance, which is not enough because those are getting way out of hand as well. But y'all support on those items, understanding that is going to generate a deficit for us. I know I can speak for everyone. That's very much appreciated.
Yes, sir. I would say this is the fourth budget that I've had the pleasure to come and bring in that first year, finishing the process with that. And I would say I'm probably most proud of this budget. With the things that we've been able to do for our employees, with what we've been able to do to really ask the question about how our employees are being compensated and are they being fairly compensated compared to the market, and make some adjustments on that, to open up a new intermediate school and to add the staff that we need to help us move the ball down the field, so to speak, in regards to academic performance. I think I'm very excited about what we've been able to do here. And I will point out, as you know, these are the budget that we're asking you to adopt tonight. Changes throughout the year. It is amended as we go throughout the year, and oftentimes, as has been the case, we come in under our projected deficit budget, including last year, which was actually a surplus. So those are some things that I'm very proud of, and I appreciate Mr. Martindale and Mrs. Parks, their staff, for their hard work, and our principals and our directors for bringing those things forward that we absolutely need to be able to put forward in this budget.
I think you also need to be commended with the way that you've gone forward with financing with the bond. I mean, our community obviously supports education, and we've been very fortunate that we've not had trouble having a bond pass. But somehow we need to highlight that because of the good stewardship of the administration in monitoring how to go about selling those, that in essence, they're going to see very little change for the actual tax rate. Now, obviously, the property value is a separate issue, but the fact that we've been able to build 3 schools for, 3.5 cents on the on 100 is pretty remarkable, and y'all need to be commended for that. Even though Dr. Wesson thinks interest rates should go up, but
just on our money. I think it's worth kind of noting for the record, this is the first time in a while, certainly we've had any kind of recapture payment this large. And I know we don't have a ton of people in the audience tonight here for an August board meeting. And I think our YouTube was a bestseller. I don't know, Chuck. Yeah. Big high views on that for going back and watching the workshops. But I think it's important recognizing for the record that we have $6 million of local taxpayer money that is being shipped to Austin because our state legislatures, let me think about a good way to say this, cannot find an appropriate way to fund education in the state. In particular, our Texas Senate and while the public listens to our legislatures yell about increasing local property taxes and how they're trying to control that out of one side of their mouth, out of the other side of their mouth, they're cutting funding for Texas education, which they know when they do, essentially is going to cause local property taxes to go up. So do not listen to them when they say we're doing our best and that you should blame your local government for increasing local property taxes when they do absolutely nothing to help correct the situation on their side. So I commend you guys for what I thought was going to be a much worse overall budget for us, given our circumstances, and making things come in the way they did. But I think it's worthwhile noting where much of the root of our problem lies. The notion that all of a sudden now we're out $6 million, and we've managed to work with that is kind of an amazing feat in a lot of ways. So I would encourage people to contact their legislators and let them know what their feelings on this are. But well done to you guys and everybody who worked on this budget for the district, because I think it's could have been much, much worse. So.
that's a high point. Let's keep going.
Thank you very much.
Move on to C2, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2017 state and community-based accountability ratings. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yokin, members of the board. As we shuffle chairs up here, I'm being joined by Molly Perry, Executive Director for Special Services and Accountability. And it is August, so it's time for the temperatures to go into triple digits. It's time for school kids to come back and start school. It's also time for us to report a couple different accountability ratings. The ones that are assigned to us by the state of Texas, which were announced today statewide, and those that we choose to rate ourselves on our community-based accountability system. So Molly's here to share our results on those, and we'll have some conversation and questions anytime that you have throughout the presentation. Ms. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. Dr. Yokin, members of the board. As Dr. Ely shared, we're going to talk to you a lot about accountability tonight in a variety of systems. So we're going to start a little bit with the state. Those ratings were released just today publicly. And so I thought it might be helpful just to provide a little bit of a refresher on how those ratings are constructed currently. knowing we're moving forward into a new system, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to keep track of what exactly is current versus what might be in the future projected. So we are continuing to be under a 4-index system for 2017. Those are listed there on the left of the slide. And I provided a little bit of a description of what each of those indexes really means, because sometimes a phrase like closing performance gaps might be a little bit ambiguous. And then under the methodology, we're looking at how is that actually measured in reality? How are we doing the math? So looking at student achievement, that one's pretty simple. It's all students, all tests, a simple percentage calculation on how we did. Then index 2 really looks at a progress measure. So we're considering the student's performance on the previous year or previous year when that content was administered compared to the current year. And so that's only going to be those students who were with us and took those previous assessments. Then closing the performance gaps is really looking specifically at historically underperforming groups. For every campus and every district, we'll always look at economically disadvantaged students under this accountability system. However, the other components of that would be the 2 lowest performing groups if you have enough to meet the minimum size criteria. So some of our campuses on Index 3 have all 3. Economically disadvantaged as well as 2 other groups. Some campuses may only have economically disadvantaged if their student groups are so small that they would not be factored in, they would be excluded. And then 4 is really looking at post-secondary readiness. For our campuses that are K through 8, that is only based on STAR performance. However, at the high school level, there are 3 other components that can be included if that campus has been open enough or long enough to have data in those areas. And so that would be things like the percentage of students that are graduating in 4 or 5 years, what plan are students graduating on. We're still looking at that recommended and distinguished versus minimum. Then looking at post-secondary readiness, which is a very sort of broad term to encompass a student who's met an indicator like ACT or SAT performance or TSI, or they've taken a coherent sequence of CTE courses or met standards on AP tests. So that can be a lot of different factors, but as long as you meet one, then you are check post-secondary ready or post-secondary ready for Index 4. So walking through each of the 4 indices, we can see this is a very heavily laden system on the STAR assessment. We reported last month to you all about our STAR performance, and so this is really sort of that next phase of what does that mean in terms of accountability. Well, each of our campuses, as well as the district, is going to be rated as either met standard or improvement required. For one of our campuses, our campus, Timber Academy High School, number 002, we still have students enrolled there. Those students who were already part of that campus remained enrolled, and then we've added College View High School, campus 004, for those students who are coming in under that new model. And so we have one campus, Timber Academy, who would still be on that alternative system. So can be a little bit confusing during this time of transition from the old to the new. Then, ultimately, a campus or a district would have to meet either Index 1 or 2, but you have to meet Index 3 and you have to meet Index 4 to overall meet standard or meet the alternative standard in the case of Timber. The targets remain the same from 2016 to this year. If you'll recall, last month we spent quite some time talking about context and all of the changes affecting the STAR assessment system this year, especially for those students who are English language learners or those students with disabilities, since several versions were eliminated. And the logistics behind not upping the rigor on targets was that we had a lot of change, so we're going to keep the bar the same.
Those targets are not percentage.
Yes, that's a great point. Dr. Ely was sharing that the targets are not straight percentages. These are calculated on formulas that TEA and the commissioner develop. So then looking at our results, the district met standard in all 4 indexes. And so you can see that green bar defines where those targets that we just looked at on the previous page were. And then the top of the bar chart will show where College Station ISD performance was relative to the state standard. Each campus receives a report like this. They're all currently publicly available, and they will also be shared with our parents at each of the respective campuses for them. Then looking at a broad sweep of all of our campuses listed here, you can see the district through high schools all the way down through elementary. You can see our rating as well as whether or not that campus met the index for 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you'll notice that, as I mentioned, CAL, the Center for Alternative Learning, that's the PEAMS state name for timber, did meet the alternative standard. However, College View High School did not in Index 2 and 3. Now, 2 alone, if you'll recall, would not have resulted in an improvement required. However, Index 3 did result in a rating of improvement required.
Just wanted to visit just a little bit about College View High School. Obviously, it is on IR status. It was given a rating of improvement required. As you recall, College View High School opened in its new form this last year with freshmen and sophomores only. And about testing time, we probably had approximately 35 students enrolled in the school. The index that would have kept, that did keep College View High School from meeting the standard was Index 3. And so it was students, it was economically disadvantaged students only in their performance on English 1 and English 2 end of course tests. So we actually had 13 kiddos take the test and 6 met the standard, which was below the index. What is interesting to note is that we also had the same kiddos took the Algebra 1 end of course exam and the Biology 1 end of course exam. 5 of our 7 economically disadvantaged kids passed Algebra 1. Also 5 of 7 economically disadvantaged kids passed Biology 1. Had those kids been included in the calculation, then College View High School would have met the standard. I said that to kind of illustrate what we have done a few times in the past when talking about state accountability ratings is the razor's edge, and sometimes the ways it can be calculated can defy logic sometimes and can be frustrating in others. For example, in this case, the kiddos who attended College View High School, if all of them been able to be used in the system, they met the standard. So really, College View High School met the standard for it. Unfortunately, a system that was put into place to help campuses with small numbers like College View to exclude results when fewer than 10 kids take an assessment actually ended up hurting us in this particular instance. So our performance of our kiddos who took the Algebra 1 test and our kiddos who took the Biology 1 test were excluded from this calculation. And that's why for this preliminary rating we ended up improvement required. That being said, we know that College View, like all of our schools, can improve performance, and we've been working on ways to improve teaching and learning inside College View and indeed in all of our campuses. And we know that working with Dr. Martinez and under her leadership and her staff there, that we're going to see improved teaching and learning there. I mean, I know that will be reflected on both state mandated assessments as we move forward and other assessments as well. So love to answer any questions you have about that at this point, or we can move on and have Ms. Berry continue with the presentation.
Okay, going on.
Thank you.
All right. Another component of the state accountability system is system safeguards. And this is a way to meet federal requirements to ensure that we are not overlooking specific student groups and that we're not at such a level that we are not able to see where there might be performance issues. And so those are also part of what was released publicly today. As a district, we met 60 of 74 or 81% of those safeguard areas. And of those that we did not, it was specific student groups for passing rates on STAR, as well as a few student groups on graduation rates. And those targets are set quite high, and missing some student system safeguards is not uncommon for districts. What that means is that we will ensure that those components are incorporated into our district improvement plan as we have in the past. And so there were not any major surprises there, but areas that we know that we need to continue working on. As well as campuses, yes. Campuses receive system safeguards as well. Another component of the system is distinction designations, and those are calculated very differently than any of these other components because each campus actually receives a group of like campuses. So they're looking at the campus level as well as the size and demographics, and they're grouping campuses that are very similar. And so rather than comparing two campuses in College Station ISD, you will take a campus and you will compare it to districts around the state that are very similar. And so it's a much more apples to apples type of comparison among campuses. So you can see right away that a number of our campuses did receive distinctions in the content areas of ELA reading as well as mathematics. Then, of course, science, we're a little more limited because we don't give a science exam at the elementary level, but we did have a few campuses meet that criterion for receiving a distinction in both science and then social studies. Then the progress measure, again, is looked at here in terms of the top 25% for both progress and then closing gaps. And then finally, post-secondary readiness. And again, that's very STAR focused for elementary. So that's based solely on that performance.
So are those element, yeah.
And
And with that, we'll transition to a topic that we love to talk about, and that's community-based accountability. We're very proud of the system. We have worked very hard over the last 4 years to develop a system that we feel like really captures so much more than what you can really ever do on one day and one test. The system is something that we really involve our stakeholders in. It's something that you all, I think, are very familiar with. And so we're excited not only to share the results of that system this year, but to show you some new ways that we've worked to communicate that with our community. So one of the components in terms of developing the system that I think is going to find us pushing forward in new and different directions and being very innovative is our involvement with the Texas Performance Assessment Consortium, or TPAC, because that's a little bit less of a mouthful. And we are one of 44 districts across the state, as you all know, that are involved in this process. And it's been very exciting work. In fact, at our last meeting, when we gathered earlier this month, we talked about how this is really starting to gain national attention. There is a lot of interest on what's happening in Texas. Texas has always been a leader, sometimes for the good, sometimes not so much, in the world of education. But this is something that's very organic, with districts really wanting to examine what does it mean to assess? How can we develop high quality, meaningful assessments that really provide teachers with the kind of information that they can turn around and use to help drive their instruction, rather than this sort of post-mortem idea of STAR that comes after school is already out and doesn't necessarily tell us the kind of information we need to support students. And so this committee is looking not only at the component of community-based accountability, that's the part that Dr. Ely and I are most directly involved with, but also at formative and summative assessments. And so it's very exciting work, and we expect that our next iteration of community-based is going to be heavily dependent on some of the things we're learning there. So for this year, looking at our community-based accountability website, this is a brief snip of what that looks like on the main page, and I have to give major credit to Mr. Glenn Winkle. He has worked diligently to help us really sort of give this a whole new face lift and look, and I think that the information is very accessible and much more visually appealing. So we're going to take a look at just a few of those screenshots here in a moment. The community and student engagement ratings, that's something that came out of House Bill 5 several sessions ago that we've reported on every year, are listed here by campus. So you can see on the left, district and campus, as well as across the top, the 7 areas that are required, including the overall rating. These were reported to the state as a statutory requirement back in June, and so they are available publicly at this point as well. This is going to be the last year for that, though. As we move into the A through F system, these are no longer a part of requirements. That will not mean that we stop engaging in community-based accountability, however. So just a brief look at a few of the components, because I know you all are very familiar and there's lots of great information on the website. This is really sort of the look on the landing page of just a piece of what that is. We've pulled out some of the more interesting and relevant components of each of those indicators that are aligned with our core commitments. And so here you can see our staff indicator about not only recruiting, but continuing to develop professionally and retain qualified staff. Our turnover rate is much lower than that state rate, and for that we are very proud of, especially considering our location in an area of a college town and having some mobility that comes along with that. But just last year, we supported over 800 professional developments throughout the year, and we had 45 teachers involved in teacher leadership. And so those are some highlights of things that we're doing in that area. The rubric looks very similar. So this is just a snip of what that would look like for the previous indicator. So you would be able to see not only the district performance, but also each campus on that specific indicator rubric. All right, so here's an example of college readiness. This last year we had 27% of our college seniors earn at least one scholarship, which I think is phenomenal. Our SAT and ACT performance for our students was significantly higher than those state averages. And then our enrollment in Texas schools was also higher than state average. Just looking at one more, gifted and talented, we have almost 12% of our students who are identified as gifted relative to the state average of 7.7. And then our advanced placement performance is just really outstanding at 83.5% of the students taking those exams meeting the criteria relative to just under 50% at the state level.
Could you go back one, please? So if we're going to summarize, I'm wondering, I understand that the state of Texas is asking about graduates enroll in Texas Institutes of Higher Education, but because we're such a mobile community, we have a large number of students that choose to go to school outside of the state of Texas. Is there some way we can put an asterisk? 63 above, 58 is not significant statistically. I like, because there's more kids going to school than that, but they're going to MIT, they're going to Harvard, they're going to Stanford. These are not minimal schools.
So this is our community-based accountability, and the short answer is yes, we can do whatever it is we want to,
I
because
want
we're
that
creating
number
this thing.
fixed.
We do have some readily available information from the state. We do have some data that we get from students every year as we survey our graduates. But as this thing evolves every year, and we have a different iteration each year, this perhaps is something that we can look at adjusting for upcoming years.
That's when I think is important for representing our community, because our community has students going to school all over the United States.
Well, we had one that went to Oxford last year on a full scholarship, and that needs to be reflected.
So that number needs to go up.
Yeah, and I would agree. That actually is something that I have in my notes for looking at 2017 versions, because we've been in discussions about how we can better track. Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's a great catch. Then looking at our bilingual two-way model, you've got a little bit of a visual there, but I also wanted to point out that another thing that we've done this year that's very different than in the past is on each component, we've really tried to identify what are areas of improvement. Even if we didn't have anything that was acceptable or below in terms of an actual rating, there are always things that we can do to support and to improve. And so you'll see things here that don't necessarily exactly correlate with some of the indicators, but there's supportive steps and that would scaffold us towards improvement in those areas. And so we've really tried to be very transparent about the work that we're doing, and this also aligns with our district improvement plan work as well. So as I mentioned, our site is redesigned. The quick link for that is cbas.csisd.org. It should be linked to our main page very, very soon. But in the meanwhile, you can find out more information there. And with that, I would love to answer any questions or receive any comments that you might have.
Nice presentation. Any questions or comments?
Yes. Sorry. First, on the College View, is there any concern about any regulatory impact because of the IR rating Do we have any duties or responsibilities?
So first of all, these are preliminary ratings, and we will have the opportunity to appeal the rating, and the final ratings will come out in November. So campuses that are improvement required are just that. They need some improvement, and there is an improvement model that has gone through with work on the campus level. So as far as more prescriptive regulation from the state, there's not at this particular point, but there is a continuous improvement model that we will start engaging in on a more formalized basis.
Okay, and then if you had to, not about that issue, but just overall, if you're addressing parents or other community members, what's the takeaway they should have from our results?
Overall, for the
Just like a 2-sentence summary of how,
Mr. Harris,
how'd we do?
you're hamstringing me with 2 sentences.
Well, okay, 3.
Well, I would always come back to what we have said for a number of years in this district, and that the student performance on STAR and the subsequent state accountability ratings are one measure of the performance that we have in College Station ISD. I think when Mrs. Perry went through and looked at the community-based accountability system, and you saw some of the other things that we're working on as an entire system, there's things that we're doing well, and there's areas that we can improve. I would say that this administration and indeed this board is committed to continuous improvement for every child in College Station ISD, and there's a number of things that we're doing very, very well, and ratings, both state ratings and community-based ratings, reflect that. There are always areas that we can improve, and that's some of the things that we work on as administration, is trying to really improve what we're doing for each child in every classroom across this district. So I think we're doing, on balance, extremely well in College Station ISD, but there are obviously always areas that we can improve upon. That was like 7 sentences.
Yeah, but the last 2, you could have had it just there. Thanks.
Anything else? Okay, we'll move on to, thank you for that.
Thank you.
We'll move on to C3, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to becoming an innovation district. Dr. Ely.
Dr. Yokin, members of the board, as I just spoke in my few sentences a few minutes ago, that there's obviously things that we can do as a system to improve and ways that we can be better about our craft and teaching and learning for students in our school district. One of the things that is available to us is something that came about with the 2015 Texas legislature, the 84th Texas legislature. They passed and the governor signed House Bill 1842. And that particular piece of legislation allowed districts the flexibility to be excused from some parts of the Texas Education Code if they go through a process whereby the board approves it and a local community group approves a plan. And it's a very public process to develop these innovation plans. To date, there are about 1,030 or so districts in the state of Texas. 605 districts in the state have availed themselves of the flexibility that's offered through a District of Innovation plan. So we're not breaking new ground and coming in and discussing this with you. The District of Innovation, it doesn't get you out of the things that you have to do regarding your fiduciary responsibility, annual financial audits, those types of things. It doesn't even get out of the state accountability ratings. But it does provide districts with some flexibility in other areas that the state law has been too prescriptive. If you want to think about how charter schools were initially created, they were created with flexibility to allow them to innovate and do things a different way. Now, many charter schools have not become so innovative, but they've been means to siphon public school students from traditional public schools into charters, and they do oftentimes do things a very similar way. This is a way for districts to do things, some really innovative things, as well as provide some of the flexibility that I was mentioning. One of the things I think that is most readily available for districts of innovation and that they have availed themselves of in this process is modifying the school start date which we know right now by state law is the fourth Monday. You can start no earlier than the fourth Monday in August, and that's what we'll be doing on August the 28th. And they can also look at the school ending date, because right now under current law, you can end no earlier than May the 15th. Now, not too many people do much with the ending date, but a lot have looked at the school start date. But there's many other things that are available as well. We are not coming to you today or even in the regular meeting at 7 o'clock asking you to approve it. We just want to start the conversation. And to start the conversation, it would take action on your part to approve a resolution, and we'll have that at the regular board meeting, to allow us to explore this and to begin to bring together a community group to start this process. And that community group would be made up of teachers and parents and community members and employers to look at some of the things that are available in the Texas Education Code that we might want a little bit of flexibility on, above and beyond the school start date and some of those other things that we've talked about in the past. So we are fortunate to have Dr. Penny Trammell here for a lot of reasons as our chief academic officer, but one of the reasons, one of the things that's really benefiting us as well is in her former district in Coppell ISD, she was the one who took that district through their District of Innovation process with the community group and with the board. And so she has actually done this one time with Coppell. Now we're not going to implement Coppell's plan, but we do have someone with the experience of working through this process. So whatever plan we might bring forward would be fully representative of the needs in our particular school district here. So wanted to have Penny come up here and answer any questions that you may have. At your place, you will see a draft timeline for the District of Innovation. And you will see in the upper left-hand corner, August the 15th, we do have board adopting a resolution as we have that on tonight's regular agenda. And you can see we'd begin the process with DEIC as that group, the District-Wide Educational Improvement Council, to begin to be that public group to start examining the Texas Education Code. And then you can see we would be moving basically throughout the entirety of the fall semester with hopeful of being able to get this thing landed, assuming that the community group still wants to go forward and the board is still on board, so to speak, with pursuing this. We could have this for an action item as early as the November meeting. If we need to take a little bit a longer time in contemplating this, we could even go into December, but I imagine there would be some work that would be done throughout the entirety of the fall semester. So as you're contemplating questions, I just want to give Dr. Trammell, Mo, is there anything else that you would like to add for the board right now?
No, they're great opportunities, and one of them, Dr. Ely certainly mentioned with the calendar. Another one is we live in a community where we have people from all over the country and the world coming into our school system, and one of the things that we could consider is if an educator is certified in another state or another place, we could hire them and actually pay them. Right now, the way the Texas Education Code is written, we would not be able to hire and actually pay them until they get that Texas certification, which doesn't happen overnight. It's the process. So there are a lot of things and benefits that could come forth for our district from pursuing this and being on the list. This is a 5-year plan, so we need to think futuristically. If we put something in our plan, it doesn't mean that we have to carry it out. So we can be forward thinking and include some things in the plan, but as we monitor and adjust and make decisions for the district, if you all feel that maybe this is not something, even though it's in our plan, that we would want to implement, we don't have to. So there's flexibility in that way as well. The only other thing I would say is we want to be pretty comprehensive in our thinking and consideration, because if we amend the plan, then we have to go back through the process and vote on every Texas Education Code and kind of revamp. So
When you say amend, that means in an addition, not a deletion.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. So
Sounds like we'll include everything, including the kitchen sink, that approach.
I don't think so. I think we need to be targeted on things that would make sense for this particular school district. I know there are a couple of school districts that have tried to just excuse themselves out of everything, wanting the maximum of flexibility afforded them by the law. But I think our approach would be to look at just those particular things that we think would be important for us in College Station ISD.
Do you anticipate any impact on the budget for the process itself, not things that might come out of it?
Snacks?
Okay.
No, sir.
We were able, we were able to see, I know several of us are able to see some of these districts that have done this through TASB last September. It's very exciting to me that we're looking into this. I often think, I have thought about in that time that one of the places that we have a hard time sometimes is that HOSA teacher to have a certificate and to be an RN or a doctor. And this would afford us to be able to hire, I would think, in those positions that are difficult to find someone who is certified in both, which clearly they shouldn't have to be necessarily, because I know a lot of physicians that teach, at the university level, and while we would want to train them and to, the expectation is for them to be able to do these kids, because I have one that went through that program. They have to be up to par what the medical community expects from these students too, and a lot of them rise up to that and get their CNAs and able to go on and do some different things. But how wonderful it would be to be able to hire the very best person for that instead of having to go scrounge around. And not that we've had that. Let me say that, because there have been some great teachers, but I know it's been difficult to hire. And we've been very fortunate that we have found some really great people, but I'm just using that as an example to say that could be a wonderful thing, especially when we have the community that we live in that's so highly educated. And not to take away from, and I hope that we can say this, we're not taking away from, we're not going to put somebody in a second grade classroom, right? And I'll let you speak to that, because I would rather you speak to that than I. So
Sure. The importance of having a fully certified, highly trained teacher in every classroom is extremely important, and that's something that we want to always make sure that we do in every classroom. I think what Mrs. Barrett is talking about is on certain career and technical classes where where someone must maintain an industry certification and a teaching certification. For many districts, it becomes difficult to fill those. We are a school district that prides ourselves on a lot of choice, and we have tremendous number of opportunities for career and technical education in this district. And so to be able to, when we have a difficult situation finding someone like Mrs. Barrett was talking about in health science, technology, or when we have somebody perhaps in ag mechanics, someone to teach welding, we have probably a lot of people in this community that can adequately teach welding to our students, but may or may not be fully certified to teach. So it would be, I think that would be a good instance in which we would look for very narrow opportunities to be able to provide that flexibility, because that would be the types of things that we would be discussing, and types of things that we'd be bringing before DEIC and that public group that would be looking at all those different education codes.
Well, I think the thing that's important for us to verbalize and for the community to understand, the reason we would want to pursue something like this designation is to continue to improve the educational experience of the students. We're not going to in any way take any kind of shortcuts, but we do feel like that there are other things that perhaps can be done that make it even better. And as Ms. Barrett said, there's some really narrow areas that we want to be sure that all students that are interested in HUSA can participate. It's not, okay, yeah, you've found a teacher, but what if you need, someone else to help participate, to help facilitate the numbers of students that we have. So it would be more on a positive, improving the opportunities, not in any way settling.
Absolutely.
well, let's face it, the calendar's very helpful too.
Oh, yeah,
know
there's
that.
that.
Oh, yeah, the calendar. Yeah. And if you might notice that the executive team did talk about this as we put the agenda together and ask that we look at this very proactively so that perhaps if this is the direction that the community or DEIC and the board chooses to go forward, that we have adequate amount of time to make adjustments before a calendar has to go forward to the parent group. Imagine that, yeah.
So can I ask a question that might be, I guess in the back of my mind, and this is probably just my complete non-knowledge of the situation, but I don't know what I had always envisioned districts who became districts of innovation as districts that were really struggling academically with things, and that just might be a complete and total misperception. I mean, I guess my initial inclination of a district innovation was the state allowing some districts to start trying some new things because the regular way of doing things was failing them. And it sounds like, given the number of districts that have actually done this, maybe that's not the case. So,
No, sir. It was never designed as a way for struggling districts to be able to try different things. It really is. I'll harken back to the charter school era and why they were initially created. Charter schools were created to be incubators of innovative practices. Things that happened well on the small scale on charter schools were to be replicated, on a larger scale in the public schools. It's not really how it has turned out to be necessarily. And so when folks went to the legislature and said, let's give public schools the opportunity to have some of the same types of freedoms to be able to do some of those things. And that's really what it was born out of. And so whether it's innovative practices that we can try, or whether it's some flexibility from some of the more onerous parts of the education code, I think it deserves a conversation, at least on our community's part, to be able to talk about what's available to us.
how long is the waiting period after? Because this can only go for a maximum of 5 years, right? And then you no longer are a district of innovation after that, but you can reapply for that? Okay.
Under current statute, there was some thought that this last legislative session that the legislature would revisit some of the aspects of this. They ended up not. So hopefully this is something that's going to continue.
Truly,
Thank you.
some of the most elite districts in the state are districts of innovation. If you look on the TEA website, districts such as Highland Park, I don't know how familiar you are with that district, but it's one of the,
We've heard of it.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is.
Unfortunately, we have a board member that went to school there, but that's
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, we don't hold it against him.
Two simple questions. You said one is, when was this created? And two, is there in the last few years been more of an increase in schools participating in the last couple of years? I imagine a lot because of the
It was
school.
created in the 84th Texas legislature, so 2015.
Okay.
Took about a year to kind of figure out what all this meant, have the administrative rules written. And so what we saw last school year is throughout the school year, we kept seeing this district and this district consider it. And most of them became districts of innovation. Some decided partway through not to be. But really last year, a lot of districts throughout the state had this kind of conversation, and it's our recommendation to you to have this conversation in College Station ISD this year.
Perhaps our legislature will take a gander at all the things that every single district in the state is trying to get around, and realize that those things perhaps are not in the best interest of the districts and the education of our kids.
That would,
Dr. West.
that would be
Sorry.
logic.
Anything else?
Again, that's an action item on the regular board agenda. Be asking your approval of a resolution allowing us just to start the conversation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to item C4, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to middle school branding. And I'm going to indicate right now it's 6:05, and we are stopping at 6:30. And so obviously this is a conversation that it doesn't, won't come to an end tonight, but we do have another meeting at 6:45. So I just want to point out that we're only going to go till 6:30. So with that, Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yokin. Again, it's another conversation that we'd like to start at the board level. As you board members know, and some in the audience know, College Station ISD is a growing place, and we have been predicted to grow and ultimately be built out at about 25,000 students. We're at 13.2 this year. Last year, probably around 13.5 or 6 this year. But that 25,000 students will probably equate at build out to 3 comprehensive high schools and 4 middle schools. So there would be a different number of middle schools than we have high schools. Also, we know that next year in 2018, with the opening of Welborn Middle School, we will have 3 middle schools and 2 comprehensive high schools in the school district. As a part of board discussions back in 2016, when we went through the boundary adjustment process, we had some discussions about how kids would matriculate through our system, how they would advance from elementary to intermediate, middle, and high schools. And we know that as a part of the school boundaries that were approved last October, that schools beginning next year, our 3 middle schools will have students from each middle school go to both comprehensive high schools. They will be split in some manner, whether it's closer to 50-50 or it's closer to 80-20. As a part of that discussion that we had and the board had at that time, some discussion was made about, let's look at least have a discussion about the identities of our middle schools, and should they or should they not be more aligned with colors and mascots to the comprehensive high schools that we have in this town. If we know we're going to have an odd number feeding into an even number, and then eventually an even feeding into an odd, is it the time for us to have a discussion in public about what to do in regards to how our kids move through the system? So this year will be a time to do that as we prepare for the opening of Welborn Middle School. Beginning next month, after school gets started, our administration is going to begin meeting with folks on the programming aspect of that. How we program for our intermediate and middle schools for fine arts, specifically orchestra and band, and how those kiddos will move into high school will be something that we'll need to be looking at, and we will. Same will be said for our athletics programs. If we have kids being split from 3 middle schools going into 2 high schools, how we'll be able to program and to coach and to develop systems in our middle schools as they move into the high schools. So all that's going to be done, will begin on the administrative level starting next month. But really tonight, wanted to talk about the other couple of aspects on middle school branding or rebranding or identities. That has to do with, I guess the first part would be, do we want to? What would our school colors and potentially mascots at the middle school look like if we wanted to look at different identities for middle schools versus our comprehensive high schools? And then after that, we also would want to talk about the fact of the matter of the physical plans of our 2 existing middle schools. Both of them at one time were maroon, and the fit and finish, the paint job, and some of the vinyl composition tile and some of the built-ins are still maroon at both of those schools. And one of those schools became a metamorphosis from maroon to purple. And so there's both in that particular campus. So we've had our architects, VLK architects, look at some of the tickets, how much it would cost to maybe make some changes in various areas on that. So we've got a lot just to kind of lay out there to the board, but I just wanted to kind of frame it, the conversation tonight, just kind of throw that out there. And I guess Dr. Yokin, I would give it to you now, just see what would be your pleasure or the board's pleasure, what we'd like to discuss.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I don't know whether you've had an opportunity to look at what Dr. Ely has put together. I do want to thank him for taking the time to outline so we're all clear that this is a discussion to start tonight because of the situation that's coming short term, but also perhaps it would behoove us to have some rich conversation on it, because it's not a case where it's a one solution that, as he pointed out, and if you recall, we've already looked at land for a third high school, and we're going to have to be thinking about what happens in the future if we're going to have additional middle schools and intermediate schools going into them. One of the things that will be difficult in the conversation, and I ask that we kind of do, is separate it very much how Dr. Ely has done. I think we have already challenged the administration with ensuring that the middle school students within College Station ISD are all going to be treated well in how fine arts, how athletics are going to be handled. That is not what we're here to discuss, but it's more school identity, not how well you play in the orchestra and how that's going to work going into high school, not whether or not and I will screw this up, and I apologize to the football people in the, because my kids ran cross country and you run forward or you turn left. It's very easy, but whether or not they're doing the right formation for football, they're going to figure that out. What we're really talking about is there some need and some benefit to having a school identity at the 7th and 8th grade level that is an identity for the 7th and 8th grade level, because of the fact that we don't have one school feeding into one school. So with that, let's try and keep it on that piece of it, and rest assured to the community that we understand that being sure that all the students are getting equal support for their fine arts and their athletics. We think that's important, but that isn't part of this discussion. Mr. Harris.
Oh. Well, there's a lot of information here, and I'm glad you characterized that. I mean, that jumps off the page to me as the difficult thing, and fortunately, that's an administrative level discussion. If we're looking at these things, the question I have is how important is that? And since we're going to have these schools splitting, it's something I want to know more about, particularly if we have smaller groups at a school, and how that school identity, man, I don't want them, let me pick one that I know more about just because my kids went there, AMCMS. If there's a small group that's coming out of that school and going to CSHS, I guess my initial reaction is I don't want them to have less of an experience because their school is almost a pre-console environment to the exclusion of those kids who aren't going to console. Is that kind of what we're trying to talk about?
So no, let me reframe it again. So one of the things that we can't, pardon me, one of the things I would challenge the group not to do One of the things I would challenge the group not to do is solve the problem for tomorrow. We know that there is some legacy thought and emotion with how the 3 middle schools are looking like they would be today. We also know that Welborn Middle School does not open for another 12 and a half months. And the person in this room that can tell me exactly what that demographics is going to look like in 12 and a half months, I want to also talk to you about stocks, because you know something a lot more than the rest of us. This community is growing tremendously. We can't forecast that far ahead. So what I think we need to do is have a discussion realizing that yes, today, no, I misspoke, when we looked at the numbers that we had and we forecast in November, there looked like there were disproportionate numbers. all I can tell you is whatever numbers they gave us are going to be wrong. It's kind of like the oil price. You know, we don't know, but we can make some projections. What I would like us to do is have a discussion on whether or not we think it's important that I have an identity of what school I go to when I'm in 7th and 8th grade, knowing everybody is going to go somewhere in high school. Is that important? And it may be, after some discussion, that we decide that no, it's not, and we're just going to let it go the way it is. But I just think it's important that we don't focus so much on where it is today, but a long term, what do we think the community needs? One of the things that we have talked a lot about is that this community is going through the metamorphosis of being a small school, a small town to a large community. And it's painful. And it's been extremely painful. We have had lots of discussions here in this boardroom. We've had lots of discussions on the change in public places. Here's an opportunity. Is this part of what we can do to help facilitate the change from being a small town community to a large district? And obviously I'm leading the witness. I think it's important for the middle schools to have their own brand. I think it's time. I think that we need to be sure that while those students are attending that school, that's the school they attend. Because we can't tell you when you're in 7th grade at the way that we're growing in this community where you're going to go to school in 9th grade. I mean, we can give some of the kids a good idea, but there's going to be some of the students that we're not going to be able to because of the way that we grow. And so to me, I see some benefit that while we're in 7th and 8th grade together, we're in 7th and 8th grade together. And so I'd like to hear some other input.
Okay, on that note, I think for me, first of all, we have to separate the numbers from this for a minute, because philosophically, I agree with you, and I think some things that I've heard, even for CSMS, that they're looking at purple and maroon over there in their school, while it's clean and it's all those things. I've had several parents say to me that, why do we still have all this maroon over here when we have the purple? And I think that they struggle with how the building itself looks. I think about, I don't remember where we were, if we were at some training, and I want to say it's the school in the district in Fort Worth that they were trying to go through, and they made, the board made that decision to go through and make their buildings just facade-wise look really good and to find pride, and it really helped a variety of things, unfortunately, including their test scores. I don't know if that was related, but they felt like the pride in those schools was part of that. So outside of the money, you do want these kids. I was in a district that was had several, we had junior highs versus middle schools, but when we were in junior high, I feel very strongly, you're in junior high. Oftentimes I think, it like just killed me tonight to see that we are college ready into elementary schools. I mean, I'm just trying to get my kid from one grade to the next, much less thinking about, am I trying to strive for them to get to those places and fulfill their dreams and those kinds of things? But in elementary school, I just want them to read. I just want them to be able to add and subtract and multiply, and it'd be nice if they could write a sentence or two coherently, right? So, but I do think it's important for us to look at this. I do think, money's going to influence, unfortunately, our decisions on some of these things, but I do think it's important for the kids to feel like they're part of what they are a part of right then. Not, as we listen to the community, it struck me that we start talking about when kids are born, they're born on the purple side and the maroon side. And that really struck a chord with me, because to me, our elementary schools all have their identity. And boy, our principals have done a great job of having identities. I heard a conversation the other day, and I think that this really lends well here. No one knew who I was. They just were sitting over having a conversation, talking about it didn't matter which elementary school they went. We are really proud of ours, but if you don't go to ours, yeah, that one's good too, you know? And I loved hearing that conversation going on. There wasn't oh no, you better not go over there. It was, oh my gosh, these are all great. And I would love for us to hear more of that versus have that split starting in middle school. And I know it starts prior to that, but philosophically, I think it just helps everybody identify, have their own identity.
And I guess I appreciate your comments. The thing that I think we need to really think about is we don't know where the split's going to be. And so to not let them be coherent in those 2 years because they think they're going to go to some, a lot of what resonated with me when we went through the boundary adjustment is my kid has been told they're going to be purple. My kid has been told they're going to be maroon. Well, we either then microchip people when they're in kindergarten, and that's where you're going to, when that school's full, or or Dr. Ely's throwing his hands up at that idea. But there are some companies that are doing that. But we need to, I would challenge us to think about how do we make sure that middle school is as good as it can be, because it's not an easy place to be anyway, because it's a time where students are changing and they're getting harder courses and things. And I just think that there is a benefit to feeling the pride of being in the school that you're in versus worrying about where you may or may not be going 2 years from now.
You're looking at me, I'll say something. No, I mean, I don't know if I've ever heard of someone having a problem with the middle school having its own identity. I mean, just as a father who's watched, my baby, my last one, go from 8th to 9th grade, when both of my girls were at CSMS, they were Cubs. They were Cubs. And now obviously it was purple and the building was maroon. When the first one was there, it was maroon. There might have been a splash of purple, but and while there might have been a coach or a teacher that came down from the high school, it really hasn't been until the last couple weeks with volleyball that Macy is a Cougar. Before she was a Cub. And I think, I don't know if Mr. Hadnot, there he is. Look, he's hiding back there. A lot has to do with the principals that they've built that environment. When we were going through the boundary readjustment, I was calling principals and administrators across the state who, I was talking to some guys at HEB who had 3 middle schools, 2 high schools. And
Not the grocery store.
no, Hewlett Bedford. And I remember, I believe it was Central Middle School, which that was a school that was split 50-50. And their assistant principal was telling me about how they have, they go to Trinity where they're Trojans or to Bell where they're Blue Raiders. And he said when the kids go off to college, they come back here and visit and they talk about being a Spartan. So that identity, and it doesn't mean when they went to high school, they were longing for middle school. Who does that? But because the work of that administration, I think just the culture of the school, when it's been noted that I went to Highland Park, we weren't junior Scots in middle school. We were the Raiders, and we were red and gold, and that was cool. A separate identity, I don't have a problem with. I think the problem that Ms. Barrett mentioned is that's a big number down there. Where we're going to find the millions of dollars to pull off colors and things like that. I'm sure y'all figure it out.
Well, that's why there's lines there. I think everything needs to be done, but okay. That's something for discussion.
Sure.
So when you were a Spartan, what color were you there?
Oh gosh. Let me go back. No.
Okay, so was the colors the same?
I was a Red Raider.
Okay.
The colors, no, I mean, at LD Bell, for example, Hearst Junior High goes into LD Bell 100%, and they were red.
Okay.
And LD Bell's blue. You may need to correct me on this. Harwood, or no, Euless goes into Euless Trinity, and it seems like at this point, all the uniforms are black. I'm not remembering.
Well, I guess what I'm asking you,
Yeah, they had different colors.
that's what I'm asking.
The one that sticks out to me, again, I've only been a few places, but when I think of somewhere like Southlake, where every elementary school is green, and they're the Dragons. Every one. And the middle schools are green, and they're the Dragons. And there's one high school with 49,000 kids.
Yeah.
Not
Right.
really. They're great. Am I right?
Green and the Dragons?
Right, sure, absolutely. But they're green and they're the Dragons. Their cross-country team came into our store last night in Colleyville, and there was 150 runners, all wearing green, and they're all Dragons. So, I mean, that's K through 12.
I think, you know,
We can't pull that off.
we talked about this through that process that, and certainly I think my belief, although we're early on in this process, is that we do not have feeder schools any longer. And even though we might hit a point in 5 years where we have 3 middle schools and 3 high schools, in the long run, we're going to have 4 going into 3. And without feeder schools, my belief is that we should create a culture and environment at each school. Now, how we accomplish that, whether that's colors or whatever, you know, different mascots or whatever that is, but I think we will save future boards and future principals and future kids a lot of issues to the degree that we can allow middle and intermediate schools to be middle and intermediate schools and not pre-high schools. So, I mean, to me, I don't think at any point in that conversation, as we started talking about all this stuff, there was ever anybody. I mean, I think Mike made a good point. I mean, there's ever anybody that said that's not a good idea. There might not have been people jumping up for joy about saying, "Hey, let's not do this." And obviously, it's going to be a battle. I think it's going to be a monetary battle in the long run as to how we do that. But you know, the notion that every kid, regardless of which intermediate and middle school you come through, is receiving a high quality, similar education, and yet they're each proud of their own middle school, I think is important for a district. So, you know, again, I think there's a lot of information in here on how we do that, but I'm certainly 100% behind the idea that doing that for our district is in our best interest and in the kids' best interest in the long run. So,
Okay, so we're coming up to 6:30. Mr. Schaefer, do you have anything you want to add? So I would ask that you go back and you look at the details that Dr. Lee has given us, and that this will, when I say to the community so that they know, this will be something that we will continue to have discussion on. Because I think that we need to be sure that we're comfortable as we're going forward with that third middle school opening up. How do we want to help this community grow from a small district to a large one? And so we're going to take a break, and we'll be back at 6:45. So we're going to adjourn.